Welcome to Armchair Expert, Experts on Expert. I am Maximus Mouse, and I'm joined by Minimus Mouse.
I'm not a Minimus Mouse.
What are you? Well, you're a miniature Maximus Mouse,
Yeah.
and I'm Maximus Miniature Mouse.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah.
All
Don't get
right.
it twisted. Don't get it twisted.
You don't get it twisted.
You don't get it
You're
twisted.
all twisted.
Oh, now you're... Okay, so you're going Maximus Mouse. I'll go Minimus Mouse. What is it?
Is that your minimum mouse voice?
Yeah, my miniature mouse voice. Hey, we have an exciting guest today, Peggy Orenstein, a contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine and Afar. Peggy has also written for such publications as the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, and the New Yorker, and has contributed commentaries to NPR's All Things Considered. The Columbia Journalism Review named Peggy one of its 40 women who changed the media business in the past 40 years. Her books include the New York Times bestsellers Girls and Sex, Cinderella Ate My Daughter, Waiting for Daisy, and her new book, Boys and Sex, Young Men on Hookups, Love, Porn, Consent, and Navigating the New Masculinity. Please enjoy this delicious conversation with Peggy.
He's an armchair expert. He's an armchair expert. He's an armchair expert.
Peggy,
Yeah.
welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for traveling today to come see us from
Yes.
Berkeley.
Well, it wasn't very far.
Farther than most of our guests are coming from. So.
Yeah. Also, the flight's fine. What are we looking
Yeah.
at, 45 minutes or something?
53, I believe.
Okay. And did you go into Burbank?
I did indeed. 'Cause
Okay.
I'm smart that way.
Yes, and if you can do that, then it's really, it's not
It's
terrible.
practically like driving.
And then flying out of Burbank
That's
takes
true.
all of 12 minutes.
Exactly.
Now, where are you from originally?
Minneapolis.
Oh, you are. We love people from Minneapolis. We're going to stereotype right now. We know Peter Krause. We played Brothers on TV,
yeah.
and he delivered on the stereotype immediately. I'm like, he is the nicest
Nice.
person I've ever met.
We're
Then-
nice.
Yeah.
Yes, you really are. And then we did a live show last summer
We
in
did.
Minneapolis, and again, it was the nicest group of
Everyone
people.
there was just shiny and nice.
Minnesota nice.
Yeah.
It's real.
What did your mom and dad do in Minneapolis?
My dad was a lawyer, and my mom was a teacher and then a stay-at-home mom.
And what kind of law did dad do?
You know, I spent many, many years sitting at the kitchen table, staring out the window, not listening to that.
Okay.
But
So something
He was-
riveting like intellectual
like
properties or something?
bankruptcy.
Oh,
He
bankruptcy.
actually won a Supreme Court case that changed bankruptcy law.
He did?
Wow.
Yes, he did. My daddy did, and he's 93 now, so he's still around.
That's so impressive.
That is-
We all went.
Oh, you went?
We all went to watch him. Yeah,
You
my whole
watched
family
him? Wow.
Argued. My whole family went. My brothers are also lawyers.
Okay. How many brothers?
I have two older brothers.
Okay. Now, do you have little sister syndrome?
Yes.
Okay. Good.
I thought you were going to ask me if I had little sisters. Yes.
Yeah. I think of my poor sister. I have a younger sister, and I also have an older brother. And yeah, just growing up in a house with two boys, and those being the people you were emulating, it's a very specific path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's good. I mean, and I always say this about, I think when boys have sisters,
Older sisters.
it
Yes, I
makes
agree.
a big difference in who they are.
Oh, I think that dynamic seems to predictably make the best boys.
I really do think it does, to be
Yeah.
honest. I really do.
It's healthy to be around female early in your life who can kick your ass.
I think that's probably true. And for me, I don't know. I'm just like a permanent sister. You know, like I relate to just about like all guys like their sister.
Right. Well, in your new book, you had really I can't even imagine you expected the level of access or the level of openness that these young men were giving you, right? Wasn't that come as a shock to you?
Yeah, it really did. I mean, I was really hesitant to do a book on boys. I'd been writing about girls for a long time, for like 25 years.
Right.
And part of my hesitance was that I basically have like whole transcripts of,
Yeah. Where had you gone to college and what did you major in?
I went to Oberlin
Okay.
in Ohio, and
Yeah.
we weren't allowed to major in anything practical
Oh,
at that point.
Okay. What
I
were
think
you?
they've changed that a little bit. But so I was an English major.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a useful major. Could have sent you right to law school.
That's true.
Well, that was the whole thing.
I
Dax was that I
imagine.
was trying very, very hard to avoid going to law school.
Did your father want you to pursue that?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes, and I mean, I think my parents kind of expected that I would be a lawyer's wife more than I
Oh,
would be a
okay.
lawyer, but
Maybe go to law school and catch a lawyer husband
perhaps
there.
so. Yeah, but my brothers, my lovely big brothers, who were by that time both either lawyers or in law school, sort of ran interference for me. I kind of pictured them like big linebackers, sort of
Yeah.
saying, "Not her."
Uh-huh.
And I think also that I got through on this kind of weird, like sexism worked in my favor in a funny way
Tell me how.
because I think my dad didn't think that I was going to really have to make a living.
Right. Oh, so expectations were low?
Yeah, and so they weren't really paying attention, but B, kind of sneaking through and saying I'm going to be a writer wasn't as threatening.
Sure.
Because somebody else would, take care of me. It didn't work out that way.
It didn't work out that way. So your dad probably grew up in the 30s, 40s?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so his paradigm for what a woman was going to be was obviously...
I don't say that with any ill will at all.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Yeah, and when I said, I'm going to get on a plane now to New York, Dad, and I'm going to go be a writer, the basic response was, that's a pipe dream, and you can't do that.
Okay.
And I thought, oh, yeah? Watch me.
Uh-huh.
So off I went.
Well, now there's a couple things there, though, too, because Peter has brought me into what the Minnesota culture is, and there is a modesty, right?
Yes.
There's kind of a celebrated modesty.
Arrogance is bad.
Arrogance is the worst, right?
The worst. The worst.
So in some weird ways, to pursue a dream as audacious as I'm going to move to New York and be a writer could be seen as arrogance a little bit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's many different layers. There's the gender layers that are happening, but
and
also
there's a
this...
fear of your child. I mean, I get that now having a kid, and I'm sure you do too. Even though
Sure.
you've followed a creative path, you feel kind of like, wow, that was a lot of luck.
Also, 10 years of rejection. So
Yeah.
it was just weird to wish 10 years of rejection on your child.
You have to be very strong-willed and have a very strong vision to,
Or
basically be incapable of doing anything else.
Yes, and or really low self-esteem and believe you deserve this flagellation at all times.
Do you know who Anne Lamott is?
No.
Anne Lamott is this fantastic writer, and she wrote one of the best books on writing. And one of the things that she talks about is the radio station KFKD or K-fucked that plays in your head when you're trying to write. So like one speaker is saying, "You are the greatest, you are the best, you are the most," and the other is saying, "Who ever told you could pick up a pencil?" You know?
Yeah.
And you got to like quiet both of those down.
When you went there, were you aiming to, because you've written for the New York Times for how long?
Ever.
Forever. Was that one of your first?
Started when I got to New York. I was there's like editorial assistants. That's like I was below that.
Okay.
I was staff, which sounds like an infection.
Well, it is one.
I
yeah.
know, right? At Esquire. So I
at Esquire.
Yeah, I got a job at Esquire.
That's a fun place to have started out, yeah?
Yeah. It was sort of a little bit, I wish I had thought to write things down so that I could have written my own Devil Wears Prada. But yeah.
Oh, I bet. So, okay, so your first book, am I right to assume that you were probably... Had you written articles that had been published before you write your first book?
I was a magazine editor. I worked at different magazines, and then I was, worried about writing full time and what that would mean and whether I could live and all those things. So then, my first book was called Schoolgirls. It was about young women, self-esteem and education, and I followed two groups of 13-year-old girls through their 13th year to kind of look at that transition to adolescence.
So did you approach it like a journalist or a scientist?
Really like a journalist. I mean, there's like a couple books that I read when I was in my early 20s. One was called Loose Change by Sarah Davidson and The Group. And both of those kind of, what they did was they like looked at a turning point in history through the lives of individual women. Mm-hmm. And I loved that idea. I loved this idea that you could like tell the story of an era through anybody, really, I think. Through
like
any
that.
of our stories. Mm-hmm. And that's been kind of the driving thing for me as a journalist, is that, like, how do our individual stories connect out?
There's a neat saying in screenwriting, which is every single scene should encapsulate, in a way, the entire story you're telling. Like,
Wow.
like it should be a fractal in that sense.
Yeah.
You know, that like every single sliver of it should be the thing in its entirety, and that's kind of what you're saying as well. It's like,
Yeah.
What did you find that was like shocking? What was the tasty thing that you were bringing to light with that book?
I really think that was just sort of setting me going on thinking about things like...
That was 1994?
1994, about like, I was looking at the way that the media was affecting girls' body image, that I was taking, like, I have a chapter in that book that's called Schoolgirls and Sluts. That was about sort of the perception of, what it meant to be slutty and, the way that girls' desire was suppressed, and what that whole piece that I think later, years later, was kind of the seeds of Girls and Sex.
Mm-hmm. which is that's your most popular book, yeah?
I think so, yeah.
It's a New York Times bestseller.
Well,
in case
so
you
is
didn't know.
Boys and Sex, in case you didn't know.
Oh, that's
As of
fantastic.
the other day.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful.
It's number 7 on the list.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That feels wonderful now.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like I was starting the conversation with myself and maybe with readers, looking at the way, I sat in on a lot of algebra classes for that book.
You did. How do you get permission to be at a school as an adult?
So for that book, gosh, it was really a long time ago. I feel like I approached principals, and then principals would go through sort of a process with the PTA and the school board. And
the parents ultimately would have to...
ultimately would have to sign permission slips.
And
The kids but I also always change people's names.
Right.
And I didn't use the name of the district and the 2 districts I was in, and sort of, I offer some protection because they're kids, and that would be wrong. I mean, one of the things about the way that I work, and with most of my books, not all of them, but with that one and with Girls and Sex and Boys and Sex, is that I'm not like looking for anything in particular necessarily. I just want to see what life is like in this kind of world that I'm looking at. So I just go and hang around.
Yeah.
And I can't know what's going to happen.
Right.
So, whether it was like in that book that there was a sexual harassment case that suddenly burst forward, or like in Boys and Sex, one of my very favorite scenes in the book is when I'm talking to this boy, I'm Skyping with this boy who's a senior in college by then. And when I met him, he called himself a feminist fuckboy.
Mm-hmm. Break that down
You're like,
for us.
like you already know what that means.
Well,
I don't.
Weirdly
At
enough,
all.
we were on a family vacation, and family members who are teenagers, one of the girls told one of the boys that, do you know that what they call you in school, they call you a fuckboy? And he was so upset by this. He's the sweetest boy ever. And I thought, what can that mean?
Yeah,
like when I was growing up, I graduated in 93. So if someone called me a fuckboy, that would have been like a sign of glory or something.
Right.
I can only imagine. But what does it mean now?
For him, what it meant was that he slept with a lot of girls.
He
like
uses
more girls than he could count.
Okay.
But that he had this kind of veneer of a kind of, and I think he has a sort of egalitarian perspective, but he like would teach consent workshops, and he was very scrupulous about all that. But that didn't mean that he didn't take advantage of what was like a super skewed ratio of girls to boys on his campus and manipulate that and treat partners as disposable. And there was like this kind of jerkiness underneath.
Well, yeah.
And he was starting to recognize that when we met. He was like wrestling with what that meant and, how he felt about that.
Yeah.
And he was like, it felt really good, but maybe it doesn't feel so good. And
Well, yeah, so I personally have this history where I was, by all accounts, horrendously honest with people. Like, I was in an open relationship for 9 years. And I would say, like, I'm in a relationship. I love my girlfriend. If you want to do something physical and that's all that you want, that I'm up for that. But, I just want to be dead clear, right? And I had this whole thing. And now, obviously, in retrospect, people agree to things that they maybe don't really agree to, which is unfortunate.
Right, depending on the position. Like in his campus, the girls, if they said no to that, they weren't going to have much of a social life, was the truth. So if I had talked to him a couple of years before we met, he would have said exactly that. This is all good. I'm really clear. Everybody's clear.
I'm up front.
But he was not kind of going, So we were having this discussion, and it had been like, he had been thinking about this for a year, and now he was in a...
Oh, can I just own one thing on my side?
Yeah.
So the thing really I can recognize later is, regardless of the permission and regardless of the understanding that everyone agreed to, I was using them to regulate my feelings. I'm an approval junkie, and I'm using them to get approval and feel good about myself for a while. So even if that side of the street really is spotless and they agreed and is in writing, blah, 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 I know that ultimately I'm just using someone to regulate my self-esteem, which I'm not crazy proud of.
So Dax, you are just like this guy. You would be the feminist fuckboy.
Okay.
Although I don't remember you hosting any consent workshops or anything like that.
Well, that you know.
Well, it's
That
it's a new time.
You're right.
Maybe you would if you were that itch today.
I'm sure. Yeah.
So anyway, I was talking to him, and by now, it was a year had gone by since we'd first met. He had a girlfriend. He was like reevaluating a lot of stuff. And while we were talking, this other boy texted me, Nate, and Nate had like a bad history with hookups, and he was somebody who really prized connection and relationships. And he was down in Southern California, and he was looking at schools that he'd been accepted to for college. And he texted me and he was like, WTF with hookup culture. It's like an orgy down here. Do I just go to Bone Town and worry? In case you were wondering if they were blunt with me, they were. Do I just go to Bone Town and worry about it later, or and have an emotional connection later? Do I skip that part? What do I do?
Yeah.
And so I read this text to Wyatt, who I was Skyping with, and they ended up having this like whole conversation through me.
Oh, wow.
About authenticity and about who you should be and who you are. And it was like this amazing moment, which like this was taking me way back around to what I first did, which is that I can never anticipate what's going to happen when I just hang out with these guys. And I just ended up feeling like, they had this conversation. I mean, I'm a stranger to them, really.
Mm-hmm.
They never met. They don't know each other's names. And
Right.
what would what would happen if guys could really have these conversations, honestly, in their real lives, not with some like total stranger or a book?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, so much. I mean, there's a million different bad ingredients in the stew, but one of them that's so powerful is, that boys really don't feel comfortable talking to other boys about anything, really, that could be vulnerable or
Exactly.
show any, lack of total conviction on every single topic.
Right. Which was totally at the heart of this. And so this at the end, this boy, Nate, the guy who was texting me, was like, "Thank you so much. That's just what I needed to hear." And he sent me a little heart emoji.
Now, I immediately think of like the murkiness of your role in that you start by hoping to learn from them what their culture is around this topic and how they are acting and whatnot. But of course, you develop relationships as happens, and then they're asking you advice. So he was in Southern California and asked you, like, what should I do?
Right.
And so tell me about that aspect of it. What's the line you walk in? Is it challenging? Is it?
It can be. I mean,
Yeah.
mostly it's not. Mostly I feel like what they would talk about after our interviews was that it felt sort of cathartic or therapeutic, or they had never had a chance to talk about sex and intimacy and masculinity and gender dynamics and all these things to anybody. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of times they'd say, "I've never told anybody this," or, what the fuck, I'm just going to say this. Sometimes that meant that they were going to disclose like something they did that they felt bad about.
Sure.
Or that, whatever. But I felt like boys never have that permission to have those conversations. And so what I was kind of giving them, if my role is to give them anything at all, was this protected space where they could talk about their interior lives in a way that they never get to. So just kind of like by bearing witness to that.
Yeah. Well, one of the points you make early on in your book, maybe even in the introduction, is that what you knew by doing Girls and Sex is that parents are not talking to their kids about sex
No, they are not.
at all. And then they're even talking less to boys because they're less concerned in general about it. Is that fair to say?
Well, they had been, but I think things have changed.
Oh, you think they used to
I think
be?
things are changing because they're worried. They're worried that if their boys are going to cross lines and
Get into some kind of
get
sexual
into trouble,
assault
and get into
issues.
things that girls just used to see as the price of admission and not act on.
Yeah.
Luckily, we now do.
Yes.
But that means that boys have to be more mindful and more educated and actually see their partners as people.
Yeah.
So what boys would say that they tended to hear was, don't get a girl pregnant,
Yeah.
don't get a disease,
Mm-hmm.
and respect women.
Mm-hmm.
And that last one like encompassed like all this stuff, right? And I would say like, I don't know, one guy said to me, that's like telling your son not to run over any little old ladies and then handing him the car keys. I mean, you don't think you're going to run over any little old ladies, but you don't know how to drive.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Right.
saying the
Very,
word
like,
respect is a very
meaningless.
Yeah, it means nothing.
opaque kind of, what
Yeah.
the fuck does that mean?
Exactly.
And also, you're in a really weird paradigm when you're that age, which is your parents aren't telling you the truth,
Right.
and you're dead aware of it.
Right.
Like, they're not telling you the truth. And so then your only other source is your peers, and they're piecing it together. So you're kind of trying to pick who's right. And certainly your parents haven't earned your trust in that department.
Right.
So you're probably more likely to believe whatever your buddies are, who everyone already likes. Whatever he's doing must be the right thing to do because everyone likes him.
Right.
It just kind of ends up being really basic calculations you're
Right.
doing that aren't probably the best
Plus
ones.
the media. Plus now kids have this like, gigantic media that we didn't have.
Right.
I mean, it just wasn't like that.
No, I had to
and-
steal a Playboy from my grandpa's house and hide it
Exactly.
under the bed. Yeah.
And not even the porn, but like all of it, the coming at you, it's so big
Yeah.
that, a lot of it comes. So that's why I kind of felt like, we need to have some real conversations with boys and hear what they're thinking and know what's going on with them because, we didn't have the luxury of not talking to them anymore.
Yeah, so I think that in general, and again, this will be self-serving because I'm a boy, but just the general marching orders of the last 3 years in the wake of Me Too, just being like, men be better. Well, okay, it's a lot more complicated than
What
that.
does that
Like
mean?
we're in the middle of a working machine that women are a part of, men are a part of, parents are a part of. There's no one is just individually on their own, not interacting or not being affected,
Right.
So it's so complex. No one could ever say a statement like girls be better or boys be better. It's like, hey, society, we got to be better. Like both sides, this whole thing has got to evolve.
Right. Absolutely. And that's why, like, to me, doing the books together, Girls and Sex and Boys and Sex,
Yeah.
like, to just make all those dynamics visible,
Yeah. What were the girls against? So just in my own, having not written a book about it, but just being now a father of girls, starting to recognize some of these things I've grown up with. One thing that I tend to really stress out about is this crazy pressure that's put on young girls about their virginity, and that you have to make sure this guy is a good guy, that he loves you, that it's special, and no one's putting anything on the boy's shoulders. It's just like you at 14 or 16 or 17 need to have the ability to assess who's a good man who loves you in order to do this thing. And by God, if it turns out he wasn't that, then the shame that accompanies that, just the whole responsibility is on this young girl's shoulders, which I find to be just wholly unequal.
Well, and I guess I would even step back further and say, how do we define sex? Do we count oral sex as sex? Like, why are we not, could there be multiple virginities instead of just this one thing? And
Right.
I mean, a lot of what I talked about in Girls and Sex was the ways that girls learn to disconnect from their bodies and that the ways that they learn to disconnect from desire and pleasure. I call it the American psychological clitoridectomy.
Okay. Clitoridectomy. Okay.
Right. So like when kids are born, when babies are born, we tend to name all of boys' body parts. So like we'll each say like, there's your pee-pee or something, right?
Yeah, bird.
And with girls, we go right from navel to knees. And we don't, like, we leave this like whole situation in between, totally unnamed. And then they go into like, maybe they get older, they go into puberty education classes and they learn that boys have erections and wet dreams and girls have periods and unwanted pregnancy, right? Not the same.
Yeah.
And you see that, like that internal diagram of the, it looks like a steer's
fallopian
head or something,
tubes
right?
and the
Or Jojo
uterus.
Keith painting, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it grays out between the legs, right? So you never say vulva. You never say clitoris.
Minora majora.
Exactly. No surprise. Most girls have, 14 to 17 years old have never masturbated even once.
Really? The majority?
Yep. And then,
Monica.
Wow.
We're always trying to figure this out, by the way. We always get into conversation. We're like, what percentage do you think
girls
surveys
versus
boys
now
versus
I would
girls?
have to, I'm blanking now. Is it 40% or 60%? Is it the majority or close
You
to
can-
it?
Sure.
But,
Email me later and
I
I'll
can
put it in the
email you and
fact
you can,
check.
because it's like not at the top of my head, but it's right, but it's a lot. It's most. It's like,
Right.
and so then they go to their partnered interactions, right? And we somehow expect that they're going to know what they want. They're going to know what they need. They're going to know their limits.
Even
they're
if
going
they
to know
knew all
any of
that,
it.
how to communicate that
Yeah,
to some guy
and
who's trying to
we
act
have
like he knows what he's doing.
Exactly. So we've like set them up. And then on top of that, we make this really big deal of this one act. Like it's the line in the sand,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's not even an act that certainly the first time is going to feel that good to most girls.
Right.
So like the whole thing skews it away from girls having a sense
Pleasure.
of their pleasure, of their bodies, of their desires, and having an experience that's really like in that body and
Yeah.
connected. So even beyond what you were started with of saying you've got to find this right guy and stuff, the whole premise is wrong in a way.
Right. Yeah. Well, by the way, the reward for finding the right guy is not that you'll enjoy it or have an orgasm or find joy and intimacy. It's just that you won't have the shame and regret.
Right.
You won't be made a fool of and made to be a slut and all these
Right.
other pejoratives.
And it is true that most young people want to explore sexuality in a trusting relationship.
Mhm.
But, we just act like doing it this one thing one time
Yes.
is suddenly going to make you experienced or suddenly make you know something that you don't know. And we all know that's a lie. Like
Yeah.
if you make out with somebody, you're 15 years old and you make out with somebody for 3 hours and you're experimenting with like sensuality and communication and
Yeah.
you're going to learn a heck of a lot more than if you get drunk at a party and hook up with a random to punch your V card,
No, you're right. The much bigger source of that feeling of intimacy and love and connection is actually
And eroticism
yeah.
and sensuality, all that
Uh-huh.
stuff, right?
Yeah. Okay, so with girls, there's that issue. There's also these two options on the table, right? Which is you're either a prude or you're a slut.
Right.
Those are
Both of which are negative. What's the right number? How do you negotiate? Like one girl said to me, usually the opposite of a negative is a positive, but when you're talking about girls and sex, there's two negatives. So where do you go on that pole and figure out where you are?
Now, so personally, I was super sexual really young. I was also molested when I was younger. So it's hard for me to iron out what I think a human's just natural disposition is to that. I certainly desired it greatly. I don't know how much I can speak to your average boy, but I definitely do remember having many friends who I was shocked to learn they didn't want to have sex.
Mm-hmm.
So I was subscribing to this stereotype as well that boys just want to have sex. And then occasionally I would have a friend that would be like, I'm scared to do that. And I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, I mean, that's, one of the things that I talk a lot about with boys is that stereotype that they're always down to fuck. They aren't necessarily.
Uh-huh.
There's that pressure that you're supposed to be that way as a guy. The whole way you get status, that's a big way to get status. Hooking up with as many girls as possible with as little feeling as possible and treating your partners as disposable. And guys had related to that in all kinds of different ways. I mean, I always think about this one guy who said he'd had a bunch of hookups in college that included intercourse. And he said, it's weird because it's like, there's not a lot of eye contact. You don't have a lot of conversation.
Right.
And it's like you're acting vulnerable without being vulnerable.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you're taking physical steps of vulnerability, but there's really no emotional vulnerability.
And really, and I know this, that the whole vulnerability issue really interests you. And
big time. Yeah.
Sometimes after you write a book, you don't realize what it's about till after you write it.
Mm-hmm.
And you start talking about it. And I've realized that really at the heart of this book, and you see the word vulnerable is like a neon sign throughout the book, is that issue of guys wrestling with the taboo against vulnerability, whether it's that they're rejecting it or denying it or embracing it or capitulating to it. It's all of it, whether you're talking about the masculinity itself or all the different ways that I talk about their relationship to sex. And it's always dancing around that. It's always trying to reckon with that and with the wall, that they've all put up between themselves, that vulnerable self in the world.
Yeah, and I was really acutely interested in how things have changed since I was that age when I was reading your book. And what I saw, which was completely consistent, is still the worst thing you can be is a girl in any capacity. So being vulnerable is being girly, or, not wanting to fuck would be girly and all these things. The only thing beyond that, of course, is to be a fag.
Right.
And so I was curious if that was still the thing, and it is still the thing. But then I was really interested to hear that they are very explicit about the fact that they don't mean gay.
Right.
They still say fag and call each other fags, but they also want to be clear. We're not saying that about
they have gay
homosexuals.
friends.
Right.
I mean, there are a lot of differences with boys now. I mean, they have female friends. They see girls as totally deserving of their places in the classroom and on the playing field and in leadership and in professional. I mean, all that is there too. And that's why I was started when we were talking earlier about girls and the contradiction, that I was always interested in these contradictions between the new and the old. I think that's what's going on with guys too, where like at this sort of inflection point in a way with boys, where we maybe were with girls 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so that stuff, when I would say, what's the ideal guy, they would still be saying, athleticism, dominance, aggression, sexual conquest, emotional suppression.
All of them said athleticism.
All of them.
I was
athletic,
shocked
athletic,
with that.
Athletic.
Yeah.
Wow,
It was like,
really?
Yeah, it was like, bang, bang, bang.
Still.
Absolutely. That, when I would say that, even though that wasn't necessarily who they were.
Yeah.
Also,
and so
think about what small percentage of the high school population that applies to. What percentage of people are athletes or are actively involved in that, At less than 10%. So you've got an ideal that less than 10% of the people are going to achieve. It's just a kind of a bad recipe right out of the gates.
Well, yeah, it is. Right. But back to the, to the fag thing, it didn't mean to them necessarily that they were questioning somebody's sexual orientation.
Right.
And they would say all the time, well, I would never say that. I have gay friends. I would never say that to a gay person. I'd think, and that makes it okay? think so. But it was about masculinity.
Right.
And there's this...
The word fag is the antithesis of masculinity.
Right. And it can be, and it's like slut.
Yep,
right?
Yeah.
It can mean anything. It can be applied to anything. It can, and so like it creates like when they talk about the man box or the mask you live in or whatever you want to call it, that draws the lines.
Stay tuned for more Armchair Expert, if you dare.
C.J. Pascoe, who writes about this, who's a sociologist in Oregon, did this whole thing where she looked at 1,000 tweets with the hashtag no homo.
Oh my God, yes. By the way, we've talked about this on here before. I've received many of them. Like if a guy will want to tell me he liked me in a movie.
Yeah.
And that's just way too vulnerable. So then hashtag no homo.
And that's exactly what she said. She said, what you see when you look at them all is that it's used as a shield. So that they can express normal emotions of affection or connection. And the no homo allows them to do that by using this kind of homophobic slash joke in the process.
I'm 45. I was just in the hospital with my friend. My friend was receiving, this is back in Michigan, was receiving these beautiful texts from his friends. He's a roofer, he's a manual laborer. His friends are also, and these texts were like, dude, scared me so much. So glad you're safe in the hospital. And then straight into some kind of homophobic epitaph. Like, it's the same thing as no homo. Like, oh man, that was hard. I just said I was worried about you. I'm glad you're safe. And now I got to throw something out there to just kind of negate the whole thing.
Right.
And I pointed it out to him and he was like, oh my God, it's so true. And we just went through all of them. 100% of them had some kind of disclaimer.
It exists within the gay community as well, because we have a very, very good friend, Jess, who's gay, and we're doing this separate 10-episode podcast together about relationships, and he talks about being gay and within those relationships, how femininity is also
devalued. Yeah.
Devalued, exactly. So it's a hard thing to combat because it's everywhere. It's even coming from the source. Like, yeah.
Well,
and women can treat men that way too.
Of course.
There's research that says that women say they want men to be vulnerable, but when they are, not so happy about it. Put that back in the box, So I think that we can collude as well.
Like, I think I'm only getting away with it because I'm also like embarrassingly committed to all these hyper masculine things, like off-roading and fighting and all these things where that bought me enough leeway to also be very vulnerable. Even I feel like there's some weird balancing act in my life where it's like, oh, I can get away with all that. I can wear a ponytail. I can do this because I'm doing that. So so someone couldn't just blanketly call me that.
But that's your version of no homo.
Yeah.
It's the same thing,
Totally.
essentially.
I mean, I genuinely like those things, but yes, it is. Now, okay, there's a call for parents to talk about sex. And what specifically do you think parents should be saying about sex?
With this book, with Boys and Sex, I did something different. With my books, I've tended to always like take the reader into some situation because like when you're a writer, the first thing you learn is show and not tell, right?
Right.
So I was always like, well, I have to, give an example of what this looks like in a classroom or a person I'm profiling or something. And I kept trying with Boys and Sex. I kept trying like to go to different programs or go into classrooms. And I just kept thinking, this isn't right. And I think it was because I've been writing about teenagers and sexuality for 9 years now. And I felt like I have things to say. And so in the last chapter of this book, not exactly a script, but a little bit of a template for the kinds of conversations that we have, because it's a lot of conversations, and it's about sex, but it's not about sex, just like our conversation has been about sex, but not about sex.
Sure.
it's
It's just this
about media.
overarching
It's
identity of being male.
Yeah, it's about all these different things, and it's like, you can't just, we have this idea that it's the talk, but like, if you sat your daughters down and said, all right, girls, I'm going to tell you about table manners now. You're going to use your fork and cut nicely with your right hand with your knife, and you're going to say, please pass, and thank you very much, and may I please be excused from the table? Okay, go forth. Now you know table manners. That would be absurd,
Yeah.
right? And this is like at least as important as table manners.
No, I would
to your
argue
well-being,
far more
right?
important, yeah.
So I talk about a lot of different kinds of conversations that we need to have, particularly with boys in this book, and also the role of adult men, whether it's your father or your cool uncle or whatever the guy is in your life.
Yeah.
And I think it's really hard because adult men weren't raised this way, right? Weren't raised to have these conversations.
More than that, we also know exactly what the outcome would have been had we behaved in a way that maybe we're going to now urge our boys to behave.
Exactly.
So I'll just tell you the deep fear I would have. I would have the fear of like, okay, I saw the mess you live in. I now know what I know. I can't not incorporate this yet. So is my child going to be the sacrificial lamb? Is it going to be my boy who is vulnerable and
so get
open and
that.
cries in public, and then all the boys kick his ass and his life's fucking miserable because I gave him permission to do that? That's the fear
Right, I
surrounding
get it.
all of us guys.
I totally get it. I would reframe that in a couple different ways. One is resilience is what you're after here. Not, the guy who's going to burst into tears in public kind of thing. Like, what does it mean to raise a resilient person, a resilient boy? But also, because I've written about girls for all these years, if I had been here 25 years ago telling you about my first book, if I'd been talking about schoolgirls and the ways that we have to, that girls tend to like pull back when they're teenagers and start saying what they know and stop volunteering in class and stop stepping up, and that we really need to change that's hurting our
And
girls.
really quick, I'm semi-aware of that concept, but I doubt everyone is. But girls did that, right? Because at some point, guys don't like smart girls.
Well, partly,
is that it?
and it was like, it's not an easy thing, but it's a dynamic that we were giving them profoundly mixed messages about how they should behave as women and what they were able to do and what was okay, and that you were supposed to simultaneously stand up and speak your mind and shine bright, but as a girl you're supposed to be deferential and please everybody, and so it was this contradiction that girls were living with, and to a degree still do, but I think we've done a lot better at broadening ideas of what it means to be a girl. I mean, even like, when I started doing this, people were like, well, girls are just innately bad at math. I mean, they just are, We don't say that anymore. So when I was doing that work, I would go out and talk about it. And people could be like, yeah. And then parents would say, but, I think about raising my own daughter differently to be like a stronger, more assertive girl. And I worry that she's going to be the sacrificial lamb, and that she's going to get called a bitch, and that guys aren't going to like her, and girls aren't going to like her.
She'll be lonely.
And she'll be lonely, and I'm worried about what it would mean to do that.
Yeah.
So again, I feel like that's where we are a little bit with boys, that we have to start taking these risks and recognizing so that they'll be better partners or be less likely to commit assault or be better in bed or whatever it is. But because those qualities that they keep citing as being, these ideal guy qualities are really harmful to them. I mean, they are linked to all these behaviors, like being violent, having violence committed against you, binge drinking, risky sexual behavior, car accidents, self-harm, depression, loneliness. They're not doing boys any favors.
Yeah. Well, again, I go like, oh, I could raise my boy to be this, but really, are any of the girls going to like him? Like, this is where I say it's like such a yin and a yang scenario. Right. It's like the whole system's got to be changing simultaneously.
Yeah. And we have done so much changing in a certain way with girls. Like I feel like we've done a lot around media literacy. I think when you're seeing like right now in media shows like Sex Education and Big Mouth that actually acknowledge the existence of female pleasure or, like different things. Girls in leadership, that's been a huge change. Girls on the playing field, enormous change, right? We've made all kinds of changes, but we haven't brought boys into the conversation in the same way.
Well, one thing you pointed out, which was really fascinating that I hadn't even thought of, is that if you were a young woman for the last going on 40 years now, there was a movement called feminism where you could get interested in this movement and you could start being a part of the conversation of what it means to be feminine or a woman or a feminist. So they were kind of actively encouraged to define what it is and presumably guide where they want it to be, but there's never been a movement for men.
Not in the same way.
I mean,
I think feminism is a movement like that for men, but,
for everyone.
like I think for everybody.
But there's no term
yeah, there's
where
no
it's like
term.
where the guys are starting to go like, oh, yeah, I inherited a role too. I don't want to be a 50s house father. I don't want to be that guy cut off emotionally, ignore my wife.
You want to be able to connect with your children. You want to be able to connect in your relationships. You want to be able to,
But there's no name for that movement. You know what I'm saying?
No.
There's no.
But it is funny because just inherently, because feminism has feminine in it, that men feel a little like squeamish about attaching themselves to that, even if
Right.
they are totally feminists, which just means equality.
Right.
That idea that like I'm a feminist, I think there's a fear that it means they're feminine and they don't want that association.
I only mean that feminism in its most literal term means like the
Equality.
experience of women in raising equality for women, not
means
for men conventionally.
Well, raising female equality to meet men so that everything's equal.
Right. And so if you look at like wages or title attainment or any of these things, yes, men are just crushing. Why would they wouldn't be needed to raise to anyone's level? But we're also completely bereft in all the emotional experiences in life that are as important, if not more, than being a CEO of something. So it's like there's this whole pocket of life that we don't have great access to in our society, which we should want access to that. And we should have talks about how we get that.
Well, yeah, and that we've framed it sort of so that when women are seeking that public power, that's aspirational, right? That's like reaching up. But if men want access to that,
to raise their kids.
to all those emotional things, that feels like weakness or stepping down. And so that's that dynamic right there makes it really difficult.
Yeah.
That we have to question that.
Another aspect as we talk about affairs and cheating, what I have noticed in my experience and having lots of different friends who've dealt with this is if a woman cheats on a man and that man confronts her about it, about 90% of the time within the first 3 questions will be, how big is his dick? And did you come? That is the man's greatest fear, is that someone outperformed him, that there was another man who did it better than them, who had a bigger dick. And to me, it's just very eye-opening of what our fears are.
Well, and also misconception about how
totally
orgasm
wrong.
works.
Sure.
Because that's like, that goes back to what the guys these boys that I would talk to had like such misconception of what sexual satisfaction was. And they were not, I mean, like particularly in a hookup, they weren't particularly interested in female orgasm. I mean, that was not a given. So when I was writing about the girls, that was like a big thing that we would discuss, was the sort of disinterest in female orgasm. But when it was really surprised me with the guys in that hookup culture was that they were interested in female satisfaction, but they didn't measure it the same way.
Well, didn't they think that as long as they were lasting a long time?
Lasting a long time
Yes.
and dick size.
Yes.
It wasn't about the sex. It was about the story that you go back and tell your friends. And they wanted to make sure that the story the girl was going to tell her friends was one about stamina and size.
Absolutely.
One boy said, like, I started glancing at the clock before I'd start intercourse so I'd know that I lasted a respectable amount of time.
Right.
And not for her pleasure exactly, but so she would tell her friends she wasn't disappointed.
Yes. that
And he
came
said it
too
turned
fast.
sex into kind of he said I enjoyed it, but it also turned it kind of into a task where I wasn't
Why do you
exactly in
think
the moment.
The most known go-to scenario is like, think of baseball. Why is that something every guy knows on planet Earth? Think of baseball during sex.
Yeah.
Oh, to laugh. Oh, I see. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, there's no one you could say think of baseball to who doesn't know that concept, who's a
Right.
male, which just tells you that every male's dealing with some fear that they're going to orgasm too soon, and that they believe staying in the saddle a really long time is the recipe for satisfaction, which is not the case. And I guarantee if you presented any guy with a rumor surrounding him, could be you have a humongous dick and you last forever, versus you have a moderate-sized penis and you come pretty quickly, but you gave the girl 12 orgasms and you're great at oral. No one's picking the second option. Even
is
though
so annoying.
every woman would. But by the way, it's a two-way street. You guys have the same stuff. This is like, no one's unique in this. So this is an argument so all of us guys think dick size is everything because each other does. It's just guys. Like
Right.
we're the only ones perpetuating that. It's all our fault. Likewise, all the women that are saying, I have to be so thin because of men. It's like, no, we don't look at supermodel magazines. We actually don't know about fashion models. We're in the dark about that. That's not what we like. Yet you guys have convinced yourself that's what we liked. I think it's on both sides of the street.
Monica looks like she doesn't agree.
She
doesn't.
I got to mediate here.
Yeah, please do.
Monica.
I agree. I mean, yes, I think women place a lot of judgment on other women and bodies and all of that stuff. That's real, but men are involved in that. There is a body type in society that it seems that men prefer. At different times, that changes also.
Also, we don't. I'm just going to tell you that in the same way that women don't prefer muscly men, but all of us men have convinced ourselves that all women want a muscly man, we're delusional. You guys don't all want a muscly man. We don't all want a skinny, wafy girl. We don't. I can tell you,
Sure.
of all my friends, we don't want that. And yet women
Well,
really believe we want that. And it doesn't matter how many times I say that me and all my group of friends are not looking for
I
that.
also know that's not true because I know one of your friends who does. So it is just person to person. Look, everyone probably has their own preference for their own thing that varies across the board, but there is some societal on both ends.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Why would we be susceptible to this narrative that we're self-perpetuating and the women would not be susceptible to a self-perpetuating
Well, the
narrative?
women probably are. Well, with the dick size, that's a different thing than body types. I think the women do feed into a male body type. And I don't think, and that's not my preferred body type, but the women are a part of that conversation.
Some women like muscular guys.
Exactly.
But it is not right to say that all women like muscular guys.
It is
Nor
not-
is it right to say men all want 80-pound runway models.
Correct. I think all is probably the part of the sentence that's a problem.
But I'd argue it's equal on both sides. I think we're both delusional about what the other wants.
Yes, but what I was saying is annoying is you were giving two options. One of the options had the woman being satisfied and the other one didn't. In your opinion, most guys would pick the one where the woman wasn't satisfied. That I find annoying.
But it's not. Of course, it's annoying. But
Because it means that has nothing to
But
do
it's
with
but
her.
they are earnest in that they think that's what a woman wants
So where do you feel that they're getting that?
from each other. Because the guy's in the locker room going, "Oh, I fucked her for an hour," and then everyone else is like, "Oh, I come in a minute, so I can't do that. So that must be the goal because it seems hard and unattainable, and most goals are."
Right. So that the locker room conversation piece, that was something I listened to a lot with boys.
And what did you hear?
Well, there's a lot of bonding as straight guys through, the control of women's bodies like that, and and what they talk, and yeah, they never talk about like we had this really incredibly sensual experience. It's always like they bang, they pound, they hammer, they nail, they tap that, they hit that, they pipe. It's like they were in a construction site, right? It's not like they had an intimate experience. But the thing was that I felt like the boys, they weren't like these blank slates on which the culture would inscribe that they were just all going, yeah, that's right, that's how I feel. They were like struggling with that stuff.
Yeah.
So they would, I have a lot of guys still like writing to me saying, what do I do about the locker room talk thing? It really offends me. Or I really don't like hearing the guys talking like that. And one of the guys that I talked to, he tried to go up against it, right? He and a friend, and they got mocked and, immediately shut down. And the next time it happened, one of them, the guy that I was talking to, said that he decided not to say anything. And his friend kept saying stuff. He says, I just watched him. He lost all his social capital. And I just had buckets of it, but I wasn't spending it. And he was like, and he was actually going into the military. And he said, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't want to have to choose between my dignity and these guys I'm going to serve with. But how do I make it so I don't have to choose? And there was this like whole thing. Michael Thompson, who's a psychologist, talks about the silence in which boys become men. And so much of it to me was not only about those, big dick comments and stuff, but also about all the things that boys learn they can't say, won't say, don't say, and how that is what creates that kind of rigid masculinity too, or creates a place where you.
Yeah, because I would say just in general, if some boy in that circle offers up something vulnerable, even if the others can relate, they've never been given the tools to now help deal with what was just revealed. So now it's just 6 people feeling awkward. No one has the tools. And then maybe the whole 10 minutes was just a bummer for everyone, even the guy who decided to be honest, or brave.
Right, with other men.
Yeah. Well, and as you say, sometimes the person, that man's picking between success career-wise, like in the military. If he chooses to do that, then he's not going to be one of the guys, and he's not going to actual impact on his life. Or Yeah.
And so
any
him
other-
too, like I talked to him a year later and we had a whole, new conversation about, so like, how is that going for you? What's happening? What's doing? He was, it was just very, as he predicted, he was really struggling with it. And he was hoping that, he'd be able to lead by example at some point, but really a lot of what he was doing was being quiet.
Yeah.
And that's hard. I mean, I totally understand how hard that is. And as I've been going around, talking in different cities with boys and sex, I've had guys come, like the other day, a Division I athlete came up to me and said, what do I do? Tell me what to do. Tell me what to say.
Mhm.
In a book signing line, not so much, but, we corresponded after that.
Yeah.
And gave him
What
some
advice
ideas, but
do
it's
you
hard.
have?
Yeah.
Well, it's not easy, right? I mean, ideally, there's a coach that you can talk to
Mhm.
that can bring in programming, or there's a program called Coaching Boys into Men for high school and middle school boys that is fantastic and a really like super light intervention. It's
Mhm.
coaches having like 10 or 15-minute conversation a week with guys on these certain topics. And it's been shown to really make a difference, to reduce violence and increase bystander intervention and reduce the language and all that stuff. So coaches can make a huge difference if you've got that coach, but sometimes coaches are part of the problem.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So then are there guys on your team who are on your team, who maybe you can listen to? I give some resources to them about ways you might be able to take aside somebody who's doing some of this talk and just say your piece neutrally, not make a
Not
big
in
deal
front of
about
a
it.
bunch of other
Not in front of a
people.
bunch of other
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
Just say it and maybe they'll say, do I need to get you a tampon, or don't be a pussy, or whatever they say.
Yeah.
But you're just like, you say what you say and you do what your best. Or maybe you can't, and you think about working with younger guys yourself and
being the example.
that and doing that sort of mentoring
Mhm.
that has no tolerance for that, or offers some other way, or supports the guys that you were but didn't find support in being.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not a magic bullet,
Yeah.
but I feel like there's
Hold on one second.
Uh-oh.
I had to code switch.
you had to go be
I
the
was in here being vulnerable, and then I had to go to the guy. Dude, you can't honk. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm looking at you. All right, you're good. Okay.
But
And now
also,
I'm back.
again, that's guy mode.
Yeah.
Right.
Means
We didn't go out
something.
and tell him.
I did not.
But I code switched,
you could switch.
and now I'm code
And now you're
switching
code switching back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting. There's one piece that was written after this book came out in Men's Health by this guy, Brad Weiners. He said that he felt that he saw himself reflected in some of the Me Too stuff. Like his behavior, his past. And he, not accused, but
Yeah.
he recognized.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And he was like, okay, so how am I going to do this differently with my kid?
Yeah.
And he took seriously the stuff in the book and really grappled with it and went and had these conversations with his son. I felt like I was watching it in action. It was really, really cool. But it was struggling with, how do you have these conversations with boys and support them in, making that kind of change, or just thinking about their dynamics with women, or any of this stuff.
Mhm.
The vulnerabilities, like guys' vulnerability, especially when they're drunk, to over-perceiving yes, to seeing anything that a girl does or says, any act of friendliness as it's on,
Right. Yeah.
How do you talk to guys about that, to boys about that?
Well, that's my big. So the thing I've said on here before is I agree wholeheartedly with the direction it's going. I thank God it's going the direction it's going. Again, I have 2 daughters. Thank God it's going the direction it's going. With that said, I think the entire traditional role of a man pursues a woman and she's got the brake pedal and he's got the gas pedal, that too has to change.
Yeah.
I mean, because people have to hook up. People need to fall in love and have sex. So, yes, we're going to teach the guys, as we should, to put the fucking brakes on. But we also have to tell girls, you be assertive. You want to have sex, you pursue.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I do. I had this whole thought about that recently, because I was talking at a all-girls school, and this dad raised his hand and said, I'm really troubled by the way we've been talking about consent, like it's something that boys are getting from girls, and that is still not, giving girls the agency, right?
Right.
So I was writing this book, and I was writing about this whole thing about gay guys and how they're better at negotiating consent and like navigating consent than straight people,
Yeah.
and how because they kind of have to learn how to do that because it's not like
Well,
obvious what's going to happen with whom or how or any of that.
Well, there's more defined roles.
Yeah,
that
but
what you're
also,
referring
well,
to?
I mean that they have to have a discussion because
Yeah.
who's going to be doing what?
That's
you
what
know,
I'm
like
saying.
what's
Like
gonna
you're a
happen.
top or a
Yeah,
bottom,
yeah,
and
or
you,
whatever,
you're
or whatever you're going to do. And so Dan Savage, so Dan said to me at the beginning of a gay encounter with two guys that they'll say the 4 magic words. What are you into?
Mm-hmm.
And at that moment, you roll anything in and anything out. Everything's on the table, and you have this discussion. And it's like the kind of open-ended question you wish people would ask in a sexual, like all people would ask. But I started thinking about it after, and I was like, yeah, that's really great. And I wrote about that. I said, you know, this would be ideal. And then after that, more recently, I've been thinking, but Dan's gay.
Mm-hmm.
He has sex with men.
Mm-hmm.
If you had heterosexual young people and a guy asked that question,
Yeah.
the answer, and this is back to these like hidden the girl's answer might be, I have no earthly idea.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
Right.
like,
And where do we go from there?
yeah, how do we get from that to people being men and women, young men and young women in particular,
Mm-hmm.
starting their sexual experiences, being able to ask that question and answer that for real with
Yeah.
each other, because that's when we're going to be where we need to be with this stuff.
Entirely. And I just worry that I just worry who's instigating. And you're right. The concept's never even considered whether the guy gave consent. I've never read one line of writing about a guy giving
You
consent.
will in my book.
Oh, okay. I'm not
You're
there
not
yet.
that far yet?
No, I'm not that far
Okay,
yet.
so there's a whole chapter that is about the issue of boys and unwanted sex, which includes molestation for sure,
Sure.
but also like sex that you could have stopped, but you continue with,
Uh-huh.
and also things that reach the level of assault in terms of both men on men and also things that young women may do.
Stay tuned for more Armchair Expert, if you dare.
Columbia University did a 2-year, like multi-million-dollar study on sex and sexual assault on campus and found that 1 in 3 girls was sexually assaulted,
Mm-hmm.
but so were 1 in 8 guys.
Mm-hmm.
And that much of the time, the perpetrator in those and a lot of it was groping or, you know, it wasn't like necessarily being forced to penetrate or involving being penetrated.
Yeah.
But in cases where it was penetration, a lot of it was women who either through incapacitation or negging, you know, like saying, you know, what are you, gay? I'm going to tell all your friends.
Oh, right.
You know, pushed guys to have sex that they didn't want or had sex with them when they were incapacitated and didn't know they were having sex. And I framed that chapter with this boy. I mean,
By the way, I guess I'm just going to have to imagine also it's more than 1 in 8 because it's such an emasculating thing to admit.
Exactly. There are differences. Jesse Ford, who's a researcher, looked at men and unwanted sex and young women and unwanted sex. The range was much bigger, obviously, of the kinds of things that girls experience. And they felt physically threatened.
Sure, the women.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the men did not tend to. And it was that threat of physical violence or force that tended to really result in trauma
Mm-hmm.
and that loss of control. But guys sometimes did feel that. And some of the guys that I've talked to, not a huge number, a lot of them would say, I don't know what I call that. I mean, if the situation were reversed, you would call it assault, but I don't know what I call it when it happens. You know, like they don't really know what to do with it.
Yeah.
But some of them, especially if it was like their first time having intercourse and they had wanted that to be with somebody significant and they had been drunk and erections do not equal consent, they were pretty devastated in the way that girls would have been devastated. And it took me a number of times hearing that from boys
Yeah, to even believe it,
to
maybe.
believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I just would kind of go, well, that's weird.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
me too. I'm like, I can't imagine.
Yeah,
feeling
but
that
it
way.
was for some of them, it really spiraled them downwards, and with more shame because who are you going to tell? Like
Right,
one
yeah, yeah.
guy, I mean, his experience had not been quite as extreme, but he had a first time that was not great, and he said, you know, it felt good, but it didn't feel good. I felt kind of traumatized by it, and he said, but what am I supposed to tell my friends? You can't say that to a guy.
Yeah.
It's like it's got to be. It's not even. It's got to be great. It's great.
Sure.
Right?
It's like
So there's-
pizza.
Yeah.
No bad pizza.
So there's no room, and you know, I mean, if you can't say no, it's back to that thing that we were saying earlier, like guys always being down to fuck. If you can't say no, you don't have sexual agency.
Mm-hmm.
And that's enough. Like that in itself is enough, right? But I also don't know how you can hear somebody else's no if you're not allowed to say it.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's an issue too.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
But and then there was a subset of guys too who had been molested, sometimes by other boys or other men, and sometimes by adult women.
Mm.
And that whole piece too. I mean, the whole porn fantasy of the MILF, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
No, I witness it in myself at least once a year. A story breaks where a 17-year-old boy is having sex with his 30-year-old teacher.
Right.
And I'm like, good for that dude. I would have loved to have had sex with a couple of my teachers. And then I hear the reverse, 30-year-old dude having sex with a 17-year-old student. I'm like, that guy's a fucking predator and she needs protection. And I'm like, well, I can at least acknowledge those are obviously concerning that's my reaction. But that is my true reaction.
Yeah. And, that may be an inappropriate reaction.
Uh-huh. Well, clearly, I'm aware of it. But I'm just telling the honest thought is like, I don't feel bad for that 17-year-old boy at all.
So what if he were 14? Like, what is your line there?
14's dicey. 15 feels less dicey. I mean, at least when I was 15, I was like 6'3", and I would have loved to have done that. So I'm locked in my own perspective.
Talked to guys, I mean, I've talked to guys of all ages. I have a friend who is in his 50s, whose early first experience was, maybe he was 15 or 16 with a friend of his mom's. And he looks back on that really unhappily. Really unhappily.
Yeah, well, but then it gets into the particulars, right? Like, was she manipulating him? Was,
But
there's
it's
so many.
always taking advantage if it's a 14 or a 15. It always is. It just is. That person does not have the frontal lobe cognition to make a real decision in that way. They just don't.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if you use the example of like, okay, when I was 15, I was in love with Demi Moore.
Mm-hmm.
She was probably, I don't know if I was 15, she was probably 25 or something.
Yeah.
I'm no victim in that scenario.
Guarantee
it.
you are. If she has sex with you, yes, you are.
Yes, you are.
Not
tell me
being
why.
in
I'm
love
open to
with
this.
her. I was in love with 50-year-olds when I was.
I know.
I
Matt
mean,
Damon.
tons. But if he had actually had sex with me,
Yeah.
I mean, sure, maybe in the moment I would have been like, yes, this is everything I ever wanted. I'm getting taken advantage of.
Even though you pursued him.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. All right.
You should read the book 3 Women. Do you know that book?
No.
It's really good, but one of the stories in it is about a 17-year-old girl who has a relationship with her high school teacher.
Right.
Who's 30. But it's not until she's a bit older, till she's like in her 20s, that she has the wherewithal to see what that power differential was and how abusive that was.
Absolutely. But I'll also add into that equation, I think that it was deception in that I'm certain she thought she was going to have a life with that person or a relationship.
Maybe she thought, I think that often people, when they're in that kind of dynamic, that they feel special, they feel chosen.
Sure.
They're often they become isolated from their friends because they're more supposedly grown up than their friends. I mean, there's
Sign
like
of
all
maturity.
these things that sort of happen.
Yeah,
in that dynamic that can happen with either girls or boys.
It can, but I would argue, though, that quite often the young female really believes she's going to be in a relationship with that man.
Right, because she doesn't know any better, and that's why we have to not let that happen.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm not making a case for anyone to do this. I'm only saying the man is consciously manipulating her because he is not looking for a relationship with a 17-year-old. So there's deception right out of the gates. It's a bad intention. Like, I'm going to trick this person into thinking we're in a relationship so that I can get sex out of it. So now, it is quite often that a 17-year-old boy just wants to have sex with a 25-year-old woman. So whereby both people are trying to get the same thing and getting it does feel different to me. Not okay, just I think the fact that there's deception involved in one heightens it.
I don't know. But I can tell you that, I certainly had boys who talked to me who were being sexually preyed upon by adult women, by teachers, and other people who believed that very thing, did believe that they were going to have a life with those people, or did believe, they were manipulated, they were groomed, they were preyed upon, and, exactly the same way that girls are. Our tendency as a society is to not see that in boys.
As they're a victim.
And they very well
Yeah.
can be.
Of course. Yeah. I know it's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm just exploring out loud. I know it's wrong that I don't care that this boy did this.
Yep.
And so what is the case I'm building for why I don't think it's the same?
Yes.
With the full admission, it's not right by any stretch. I don't think it's healthy for any 30-year-old woman to be wanting to have sex with a
Right.
17-year-old boy. I think there's all kinds of things probably going on with her.
And then you can ask the same question, like, what if it were a man? What if it were 30-year-old man and a 16-year-old boy? Would you see that differently?
I would.
Would you see
I
that
do.
the same?
I
You know,
do.
like, so it's an interesting thing.
Because I have a lot of gay friends who have been introduced to the gay life style and educated by someone older than them that have had a great experience. And I'll listen to that story and I go, wow, if that's between a man and a woman, to me, it's very predatorial and wrong. And then the way you're describing this thing is much different. So I do think
can
that
be,
exists.
or, you know, I mean, I've talked to Dan about this a lot too, also can be a problem, can be abusive, can be manipulative. And I had a lot of guys of gay boys that I talked to who, especially now because they've got Grindr, they would lie about their age
Right.
and go onto Grindr and be hooking up anonymously with much older men, which, you know, and I would say to them, if you were a girl, I would think that was really, you know, I would have to report you.
Mm-hmm.
And they would say, yeah, it's not great. They didn't feel great about that, but they didn't feel that there were other options, and sort of the way that we've suppressed people being able to express their sexuality has kind of forced a dynamic maybe. And maybe if we could provide more situations, more social situations
Right, where-
for gay kids where they could have age-appropriate experiences
Yeah.
and, you know, have social experiences and have romantic experience and have sexual experiences in the ways that other teens are allowed to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's what we should be thinking about.
Yeah. That if that was on solid footing, maybe the other thing wouldn't exist.
Yeah,
in the way it
and
does.
I mean, one of the things that I wrote a lot about was that, like, with gay boys, I mean, obviously it's a new time, right? I mean, obviously things have
Well, that's-
changed enormously for them, and you know they can come out at 15, and there's like a gay guy running for president and all these things. But it was like all on this social front. Like it was more like, you know, you could be the gay best friend or you could be the theater boy, but nobody was still talking to them about what a mutually gratifying and personally fulfilling sexual experience or relationship would be like for them.
Yeah.
And heterosexual parents in particular kind of didn't want to think about the whole sex piece. So they were, you know, if you're not talking to your straight kid about sex,
Yeah.
you're sure as hell not talking to your gay kid about sex.
Well, sure. Now you really probably know nothing
So that
about
really did drive them more into this world where they were kind of
looking for a mentor. of
looking for a
sorts.
mentor or looking at porn as a template. And that's not ideal. That's not, you know,
Yeah.
what we want for any young person.
Yeah. Now, again, more anecdotal information for you. I'm in AA. I hear a lot of people share. I noticed about 5 years ago, the younger guys have a much different relationship with sexuality than I had growing up, or at least different parameters. I'm noticing this like fluidity with younger guys that certainly didn't exist when I was 22 years old. I'm just wondering how that's evolved now. As you're writing your book, did you notice, like, is it still all the same, or is it there's substantial difference in what's on the table for everyone?
I'd say kind of yes and no. I mean, it seemed to me like sexual fluidity was more acceptable for the girls.
Uh-huh.
That girls were more likely to identify as bisexual or pansexual,
Uh-huh.
to be interested in going out with trans boys or trans girls.
Uh-huh.
Boys still felt pretty boxed, maybe
Uh-huh.
less so a
Uh-huh.
little bit, but I think that had moved a lot less.
Oh, okay.
At least that's what I saw.
Yeah. And what impact is that having on the conventional definitions of masculinity and the roles everyone's playing?
You know, I did look at trans boys to a degree, not like hugely, but it's definitely part of the book.
Uh-huh.
And it was, I mean, they're not, as one guy said, you know, we're not sent down like angels from heaven to change your masculinity. That's not why
Right.
we exist.
Yeah.
And some of them just wanted to be the most conventional of guys. But sometimes they pushed other guys to not like question, you know, whether they were really men or anything like that, but to sort of broaden their ideas of like, what does it actually mean to be male? What does it actually mean to be a man? What does it actually mean to engage in these things? And that guy in particular would talk about, he said a lot of times like, well, you know, that's not my masculinity, or like he talked about it like this dynamic thing that he was building, and I thought that is so interesting. I never heard any other guy. I never heard like a we would now call a straight cis guy, right? Say, well, that's not my masculinity, And I thought, what an interesting way of looking at it. That was looking at masculinity as something that you're like creating, kind of, and making decisions about, and this is my masculinity, but that over there, that's not. That, it was kind of fascinating.
And I just wonder if now that there's more acceptance of gay men, and they're, as you say, holding offices in student council, and they're, not
running for president,
and not relegated to the fringes of school. If that is somehow encouraging, going like, wait, if that's the worst thing I can be, and everyone likes this guy, like, can I move closer to that? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I guess that would be my hope that is happening.
I did see in some communities that, your conventional penis-toting guy was friends with, straight guy they would have gay friends, they would have trans friends, but there was like, I think there was a quota in their head a little bit, like you can have this many trans and gay friends, but if you have too many, then maybe that's too many. Then they maybe people will question you. Yeah. So there was like weird, ways that you could slice it. But I did see that some fraternity guys that I talked to, they had one guy who was like, Big Ten school, really Midwest dude. They had a trans guy in their frat.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. And that had really, he said at first everybody was like, not so sure about this. Yeah. But that over time, they were accepting, and that had broadened their idea of what masculinity was. So it did have kind of a good effect, though. Again, like I said, trans boys would say, not really my job.
Right. Nor is it. Now, how about pornography? So when we talk about why us idiot guys have this notion of like big dick and last a long time, because that's what you're seeing in a porno.
Right.
You're not seeing, the guy's not clitorally stimulating the girls he's having sex with 99% of the time in a porno. Right. Yeah, if that's never been more accessible ever in the history of the world. Right. And if that's the only version of sex they're seeing. And
it's the default sex educator.
Yes.
I know. That's a huge problem. There's a lot of racial politics that play out in porn. Whether it's black guys' penises or black women not being present or only certain kind of black bodies or how Asian women are depicted. I mean, there's all kinds of race stuff in porn, and I would ask boys about that all the time. Like, how do you deal with the racism? Yeah. And they go, well, what racism? Yeah. And like, these are guys who would see racism like in their normal lives. Of course they would. They were very aware. Right. But it was like they left that stuff. There's like, you leave so much at the door when you start looking through the porno videos, that is just one more thing that you're leaving at the door. But it's another thing that's affecting you. You're just not acknowledging that it's there.
My wife and I were reading Missoula, the John Krakauer book. Mm-hmm. And one of the cases was this, two, again, blackout drunk people. This guy starts, digitally penetrating this girl, and she's like kind of coming in and out. And then she says, stop. And he says, no, I'm going to make you squirt. And this boy's a virgin. He doesn't know. He thinks his job in a sexual experience is to make someone squirt. That's what he's been led to believe is the norm or the high watermark of proficiency in bed.
Well, yeah, that's why I know. And that is why we got to talk to, to ignore what boys are absorbing, and girls too, because girls look at it. Girls look at it more like a manual for what guys want.
Right, right.
But if we're ignoring, because it's really different, and you have to. I mean, I always like to frame this by saying curiosity about sex is normal.
Yeah.
And masturbation, yay. Yeah. Good for everybody. And there's all kinds of different porn, and some people consider some porn to be feminist porn or ethical porn or queer porn or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. A lot of that's behind a paywall. That's all behind the paywall. What you're going to be what changed was Pornhub.
Right. Yeah,
Pornhub came online in 2007 and dropped the paywall for the most mainstream kind of hardcore porn.
Yeah. And I've been so curious how they're making money, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know how they do it. Right, I don't really know their business model, but that
I don't really know their business model.
Yeah, that's what changed, and that was what allowed any kid with a smartphone to look at anything.
Yes.
Right.
To get a master class in male fantasy.
Right. That kind of easy access porn keeps reinforcing the study that sex is something men do to women,
Yep.
that
Yep.
female pleasure is a performance
Yeah.
for guys,
Yeah.
and
They have 9 orgasms
They
while the guy just holds
instantly,
steady.
right,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. All
Yeah.
these kind of distortions, and kids are looking at, and boys in particular look at it, from the time they go through puberty and start masturbating. That's how they're,
Right.
I had one guy who said to me that there was a boy on his sports team who was a legend because he had decided he wasn't going to use porn anymore. And they were like, well, what do you do?
Uh-huh.
And he said, I use my imagination.
Uh-huh.
They were like, whoa, how does that work? That's not a thing. But I mean, that's what, it's right there. Of course, it's so easy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's fast food.
But it's exactly fast food. And it does, even when they say it doesn't, because they'll say, I know the difference between reality and fantasy, but how would they know that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is their context? What if they haven't even kissed anybody?
Yeah.
So of course, the whole point of media, any kind of media, is that it affects our thoughts and feelings and beliefs even when we think it doesn't.
So I just wonder, this will be a provocative thought, but I don't see us getting rid of pornography.
No.
I don't think that's in our future. So to me, then it goes, well, then counter program. So more female directed, written, inspired fantasies of sex that are counteracting
when it exists is behind a paywall.
Well, we got to
Right?
get it
So
out of the
doesn't
paywall,
have-
I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, that's fair trade, right?
Uh-huh.
So that's probably not going to happen. But I think that we do have to
talk about pornography with
we
our
have
kids.
to talk about pornography with our kids,
Yeah.
our boys and our girls, because
Yeah.
our girls watch it too, and what it is and what it isn't, what's real, what's not real, what's missing.
It's no different than the superhero movie they go see. It's as much an abstraction of a male fantasy. This is a completely male-constructed male fantasy of what a male would do in bed. In the same way.
Then, what you always have to ask is like, so why does that fantasy keep getting more and more aggressive?
These guys who are consuming a ton of pornography and they're not getting any real life sex are getting more and more frustrated and aggravated, and they're getting more misogynistic and they're more pissed at women. Now they want to see the guys punish these women because they're, you know what I'm saying? I have to believe that's part of the cycle.
Yeah, I think but there's also, so Emily Nagoski is this woman who writes about the science of desire.
Uh-huh.
She wrote this book, Come As You Are, which is one of my very favorite books. She talks about how when something is simultaneously sexual and taboo, it creates this response. Like if I suddenly said to you, okay, Dax, don't think about a polar bear.
Mm-hmm.
Stop thinking about that polar bear. Do not think about the polar bear. Like now
Yeah.
you're thinking about a polar bear,
Oh, I can
right?
see it
You weren't
perfectly.
thinking about
Ton
a
of
polar
hind
bear,
legs. Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So because embedded in that don't think about this is think about this.
Mhm.
So embedded in like, don't think about sex when this really offensive thing is happening or when this really disturbing thing is happening or this really taboo thing is happening is think about sex when those things are happening. And it can make something that's like, that you find objectionable
Mm-hmm.
even more, like turbocharge arousal
Yeah.
more than something that you don't find objectionable. And I think it's really, actually, that's one of the things that I say in the book that we need to talk to boys about is some of these like physiology ideas, because a lot of the boys really wanted to talk to me about porn. That was a big one. And part of it was because they had a lot of confusion around it or a lot of anxiety around it or like,
Yeah, was there a most common question they were asking?
well, being aroused by things that upset them or like
They were like choking
you-
people or gagging people? Or,
yeah, choking or gagging or things that involved shit or
Uh-huh.
various occult. I mean, there's a lot out there.
Sure.
There's a lot gangbangs, whatever.
Uh-huh.
Or whether what they watched, how much was normal. But I mean, guys related to it differently. They didn't all relate it the same way. I mean, some of them really did kind of go like, I really felt like it was messing with my head. One guy said he was sitting in class in high school and he was like looking over at this girl and he started imagining what she'd look like with cum on her face. And
okay.
he said that was it. Like not even
Right.
naked, right? Not
Right.
naked, not like what would it be like to kiss her or something. What would she look like with cum on her face? And he's
Yes.
like, that is over the line. I don't want that I don't want those images and thoughts in my head. I think about it like with jumpsuits. Like the first time, I don't know if you had this, but like the first time I saw somebody wearing a jumpsuit, I thought, oh, what's that? And then the second time you see them wearing a jumpsuit, you're like, well,
That's
and the third
interesting.
time, that's
Looks
kind of cute.
comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the third time you're like, I got to get me a jumpsuit. You know,
Yeah.
like it just gets in your head. So there were those guys. There were guys who said, oh, it doesn't affect me at all. It's just like sneezing. But, we know that even when you think it doesn't, media affects you. And then there was some guys who really felt like whether it was, I can't say whether it was true or not, but they felt harmed by their porn consumption, and they had never told another adult that. And they wanted to talk to me specifically.
Well, look, I wasn't even watching porn, and when I was new to masturbating, I felt so guilty. We weren't even a religious house. I was constantly trying to quit that activity. I thought it was abhorrent of me and showed a total lack of control, and I was regularly trying to monitor that.
Yeah.
And I couldn't. So I can only imagine if I had, on top of that, objectively some gnarly images I'm tying with this already behavior I'm, for whatever reason, shameful of, and then that's in there.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really important not to shame boys when talking about it, for sure.
Right,
you know?
right.
And to recognize, like I said, sex curiosity is normal, masturbation is normal.
Yeah.
And to just kind of think about some of the stuff, like if you know college guys who watch porn are less satisfied with their sex lives and with their performance and with their partner's bodies. That's an interesting thing to know for a guy.
Sure. Yeah.
The thing that one guy said to me that really affected me was not even about any of that. He just said, you know, I feel like pornography for this generation, it's affected our ability to be innocent in a sexual relationship and just explore sex without preconceived ideas. He said that's just been fucked by porn for us.
Well, you kind of start knowing every single conceivable thing that could happen.
Yeah.
Right? You've seen every
and yet
iteration.
And yet you know nothing.
Yes, yes, yes.
And yet you know nothing. And we don't, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the ultimate impact is of all of that, but
I know.
But it's a huge change. And I don't think that we can raise kids in a culture of explicit media, and not even porn, but like regular media too has gotten much more explicit, and pretend like we don't have to talk to them about it. Or
yeah.
I mean, that's another thing with girls. Like we have, in all these years that I've been writing about girls, we've recognized, I'm sure as a parent, you recognize that the media images out there can be harmful to girls, right? You know that, right? They can reduce them to their body. They're objectified. They're, you know, whatever. It's bad for their mental health, all these things. We know. So we've done a much better job of like
checking in with them about all that.
Yeah, and creating like this like media literacy, and there's organizations and there's like psychologists and advocates and activists and parents, and everybody's like all careful and conscious about how we raise our girls in this media culture. But boys are in the same stew, right?
Yeah.
And
even in my current circles, like most LA parents are hyper aware of not creating potential food disorders.
Body dysmorphia.
Yeah, body dysmorphia.
Yeah.
But no one's thinking about that for their boys at all.
Right.
It's not even crossed anyone's mind. No one's worried at all.
No, and that's my point. So like we know how to do this. We've done it with girls. We know how to create media literacy, and at least, I mean, it's not perfect and it doesn't always, you know, but we try. We try to give them, because we can't make the media go away. We try to give them a lens. We try to give them a critique.
Yeah.
Nobody's doing that with boys.
Yeah.
Nobody's doing that with boys. And I feel like that's something that isn't even about like, you know, saying the word clitoris to your son, which maybe you'd rather poke yourself in the eye with a fork than do. But, you know, you can like start pointing out. I mean, I remember when my daughter was really little, she's 16, but when she was like, you know, when she was little and we would watch, you know, whatever animated films, and I'd just go like, hey, honey, you know, look, that character's eyes are bigger than her wrists. Are your eyes bigger than your wrist? Is your head bigger than your waist? Like, where does she keep her uterus? Is it in her purse? Like, what is going on here?
Sure.
You know, I know I wouldn't have said that if I had a son. I wouldn't have said it at all.
Right. Yeah. We say to our girls, like, we're reading, we came under fire about this, but we are no way saying that you shouldn't read Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. We love it. We still read it. But we're always like, kind of weird a stranger came and kissed this woman who was dead. Isn't that kind of bizarre?
Yeah, without even asking.
Yeah, and
of course she's dead.
And she's
so
dead.
that's
So
weird.
he's like, he's a necrophiliac, and he's not asked permission, and you know,
right?
Just something to observe. That's
But
kind of a weird
we
part of the
always
story. Huh?
But those are like those little weird. I mean, those things with your daughters, you learn how to like throw them in all the time. But it's because like you think, okay, the culture's going to try to brainwash your daughter, right? And you got to get in there first.
Yeah.
You got to get it so that she hears your voice whenever she sees that Snow White story, saying, well, that's weird, isn't it? You know, like you want her to hear that.
Yeah.
But we haven't really thought about like how our boys need that from us too.
Yeah. Well, I'm just delighted that you've explored this topic. It seems still in its infancy where we're talking about what we need to do to get boys.
But that's so exciting,
right?
I mean, that's what I think like with the Me Too thing, like on one hand, it's created this imperative to reduce sexual violence, super important. But it's also created this really positive and exciting opportunity to engage boys in all these conversations about sex and intimacy and gender dynamics and masculinity in ways that we never have.
Mm-hmm.
And that is like a tremendously exciting possibility to me.
Yeah, you're right. I can't imagine there's not a household where this topic doesn't comes up in mine all the time. I mean, it's in the news all the time, and it's one of the only happy accidents of the whole thing is like it is starting a conversation that's long overdue.
Right. And that doesn't
And by
have
the
to
way, we're-
only be negative, but can also be about the positive.
Well, right.
How do we help young people get there?
Yeah. Well, Peggy, thank you so much for flying down.
Yeah.
I'm about a third of the way through the book, and I absolutely love it. It's just, I like it as much as The Mask You Live In. It's just really great. I also like how frank it is.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I like
I
how
have
you're
nothing
talking
if
to
not
them.
frank and earnest.
Yeah, I like how they're talking to you. I like how you're talking to them. Nothing's kind of sugar-coated. It's like, no, this is a glimpse. This is what it is.
Yeah.
Thanks. This
Yeah.
is super fun.
It's great. All right, well, thank you, and
Thank
come back.
you.
I will.
And now my favorite part of the show, the fact check with my soulmate, Monica Padman.
Peggy. Very enlightening. I liked her a lot.
Yeah.
She was very interesting. We got into some debates.
Sure.
You know, as we do. Okay, so Peggy, I emailed her because she left an open-ended question about masturbation, which is a question that we've been asking each other for a long time.
Do girls masturbate?
As much as boys or at all or whatever. And she had said girls do much, much, much less. And then she responded and said, fact checking, yes, I was right according to the largest study ever conducted on American sexual practices, which came out in 2012, I think. Fewer than half of girls 14 to 17 had ever masturbated.
Half of girls 14 to 17.
Fewer than half had ever masturbated.
Mm-hmm.
She said, it's been a while since I cited that, so I suddenly thought, dang, could that be true? It seems like it couldn't be, but here are the citations. National Survey of Sexual Health and Behavior. More than 3/4 of boys ages 14 to 17 say they've masturbated, and less than half of girls have. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. So not even double, though.
Right.
Yeah, not like astronomical.
No. But I guess only...
By the way, let me
only
just tell you something. 100% of boys have masturbated between 14 and 17.
And they're just not saying
yeah,
it.
and I imagine that girls, too, aren't saying it. And then
That's
I would
true.
imagine there's even more pressure on girls to not say it.
Yeah, that is true. And I mean, yeah, what kind of poll would this be? I mean, I guess...
Can you imagine asking like a 14-year-old girl if she jacks off? Who's asking that question?
Oh, my God. About a third of girls in every age group masturbate regularly.
A third in every age group.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Masturbate regularly.
While the percentage of boys rises steadily with time. Oh, that makes sense.
Because they're getting less sex from their wife?
I think this is just boys, not
Okay.
men,
Oh,
would
okay.
be my guess. But
Okay.
I don't know that for sure. They probably just get more comfortable and start talking about it with friends. And like they feel
Sure.
less ashamed.
Yeah, guys are pretty open about jerking off.
Yeah.
From a young age. There's like a period, there's a couple years where you're first doing it where no one's talking about it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden everyone just owns it.
And is there like bragging involved?
No. More like comparing like Aaron and I going like, you ever put your finger in your butt while you're jerking off? You know, just
Oh,
kind of
sure,
seeing like
sure.
what kind of
War
weird things
stories.
you've done. War stories. Yes, more just swapping war stories.
Uh-huh.
Trying to pick up tips, you know.
Yeah, sure.
Is there anything out there that could increase this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad really that you guys are talking about something.
It is really. I cannot really imagine what it would have been like to have been 12 and 13 with pornography at the ready.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was like looking at bra ads in like a normal magazine and using that. and
Yeah.
stuff, you know.
Well,
I
I
had to
think
really use
you
my
were probably better off.
Well, I probably my imagination's much better.
I
'Cause
wonder if
I
that
had to-
really will have an effect on like a whole generation of imagination.
Yeah, because I had to fill in a lot of blanks and just in it was big full size like Sears catalog underwear. It wasn't even skimpy. You know?
Oh, wow.
And occasionally,
Full
once
coverage?
in a while, you'd hit the jackpot and there'd be like a Victoria's Secret thing laying around somewhere.
Sure.
And you could really sink your teeth into that.
Did you ever sneak into a Victoria's Secret and like look at the panties?
Never, no.
You
Is that
sometimes
common?
see men in there, and I'm always like, "Ugh, gross.
I know. I guess in theory they're buying it for their lover.
That's what they want you to think. But
yeah.
I'm not sure it's true.
They're probably buying it for themselves.
I think so. Okay, percentage of high schoolers who are athletes. The estimate is that 55.5% of all high school students play a sport.
That's way more than I would have guessed.
Me too. But it also says, though sports programs continue to grow, the rate has slowed. Over the past decade, sports participation has increased by roughly 100,000 students per year. The 40,000 increase over the past year is the smallest since the late 1980s.
Well, there's
I
a
wonder
big
what they're
decline in football participation in white communities.
Because of CTE?
Yeah. But troublingly, it's not having an impact on the minority groups. The numbers are the same, if not increased, filling those holes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that one's so tricky because that's like one of the things that I think is like dangled over communities that don't have poorer communities.
Yeah.
Of like, use sports to get out of that.
Yeah. Get a scholarship to school.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't delineate whether or not the lower socioeconomic whites were.
Right.
It just was a big number for whites, but I have to imagine the poor white kids are still doing it.
I bet it's the same thing.
But it's just a class thing.
Yeah. Okay. How does Pornhub make money?
Yeah.
So ads
Right.
is a huge one. Ads. There's I guess a premium membership.
Sure.
And then one said production companies pay to feature videos.
See,
and
that was
promote porn stars.
That was my question. I'm not confused how Pornhub's making money because they're like YouTube. They've got ads. But the producers of pornography, unless Pornhub is sharing that ad revenue with the people who post the clips, which I can't imagine they are, but maybe they are.
I see.
I was more confused. It used to be they made a porno and then they sold the DVD.
Right.
And so they made money.
They must make some money from putting it on there. I think there were, like, when I was Googling it, there was stuff that came up saying,
Fuck young teens in your neighborhood.
yes, that
Was there any
for
of those
sure.
pop-ups?
Oh, for sure. There was a lot of stuff that popped up I didn't want to see. But it said a lot of how to make money on Pornhub. But I didn't click that because I didn't know that's what we were talking about. But yeah, so I guess there's ways.
Yeah, I'm just shocked that there's still as much production. Because,
Yeah.
the movie industry, the revenue was cut in half with the end of DVD sales, basically.
Right.
And they've clawed some back with the streaming services and international's grown. But overall, that was just a big chunk that was lost. And that was the entire model for pornography.
Yeah.
Or at least, I don't know if they're at any AMC Cineplexes.
Well, maybe.
Hopefully
Maybe
they
that'll circle back around.
Yeah.
Hope so. That's all.
That's all?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm in general, like philosophy 101, you always debate pornography. Like
Yeah.
you debate abortion, you debate pornography, all these different things. I have always been pro-pornography. I think it's liberty and art and who's going to decide what's pornography and who's not.
Yeah.
Yet the porn that is most
Happening
popular is I find disturbing.
Yeah.
I find it to be very like violent and aggressive
Yeah.
and not even mirroring what real sex is like.
Well, that's the big problem, I think.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think we could debate whether porn should be allowed or not. That seems like a different debate than just, is it healthy? It's not. It's
Right.
not good for these young brains to be exposed to this non-reality of sex.
Yeah, these like juiced up fucking meatheads pounding some 80-pound-year-old,
Yeah.
80-pound-year-old, 80-pound gal so aggressively. Yeah, it's a little rough.
Well, and even Peggy said something that I thought was so interesting that like girls watch it too, of course. But she said girls mainly watch it almost as like a playbook. Like, this is how I should act during sex. I should make these sounds and I should do this, which is,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I believe that she's right, that probably a lot of girls
I
do
think
watch
she's
it.
right.
But I also think in the like Dr. Alex way, like, you don't know what turns people on. I think a lot of women watch it for stimulation too. So I think it's a little, I guess I always bristle a little bit when there's some implication that women don't do anything on their own accord, that it would just be to please a man. It feels a little dismissive of like women's agency.
But I don't even know if it's just to please a man. It's like, this is my role in sex. This is what it's supposed to look like. This is what a face looks like when you're in that position. Like, I don't think it's about pleasing a guy. It's just like, well, I guess this is what it's supposed to be.
Right.
It's the same thing that's happening with the boys of like, well, I guess this is what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Big dicks and lasting
Yeah.
a long time and all this stuff that none of that's necessarily true
Normal.
or normal at all. But I feel like girls, even just from seeing movies, take away an idea of
Sure.
what it should look like. And that's not necessarily true.
Right. You've never watched pornography, right? Ever?
No, we watched it once in college. Like a bunch of us watched
Some
one,
dirty
kind of
clip.
as a joke. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
but I've never watched it seriously. No,
Right. You can't imagine it being,
sexy. No,
yeah.
not at all.
Yeah. I have enjoyed it at times, but again, it's there's a few anomalies in my kind of addictive personality,
Yeah.
which one is I can gamble normally. I don't get weird.
Yeah,
And then also pornography. I've always been able to kind of take it or leave it.
yeah. Well,
But a lot of-
your imagination, as you said.
Oh, it's razor sharp. I need very little to go on.
Yeah.
Now, when you're masturbating and you're fantasizing,
Mm-hmm.
does the fantasy have to be plausible? Because for me, it has to be incredibly plausible. Some people can like jerk off to like movie stars and stuff. I can't do that.
Yeah,
or
I
like
can
a
do that.
centerfold. You can.
Mm-hmm. It
Oh,
does not
wow.
have to be plausible, and it's not even like a full like. That's why I think porn, the whole like plot that's
Uh-huh.
happening with porn. That's so
lost on.
yeah, and it's just would take me out because it's funny and stupid.
Yeah, it's not the greatest writing.
But it's more just like flashes of images.
Yeah, mine is it's almost hard for me because it has to be so realistic that I get really bogged down in the details.
Oh, your plot is really thick.
Yes, because I'll like, oh yeah, that girl's hot, blah blah blah, and oh this could happen, and then I'm like, oh, and then then she's gonna tell a bunch of people, and I'm gonna lose my life, and then I just start, I it's real rough.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then I'm like, well, go through some greatest hits that
Sure.
were real.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
That's a
and
good-
that's nice. But I do wish I could just like see a picture of a gal and really imagine the whole thing. But
Yeah.
the whole time I'm like, I'm not going to meet this person.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, it's real complicated.
It is. It's all complicated.
All right. Well, happy masturbating, everybody. Thanks for listening to the program. And if you masturbate, listen to the program. That's fine with us.
Oh, we're pro masturbation.
Yeah.
Peggy is very pro masturbation. She said so.
And do you think anyone masturbates listening to this program, though?
God, I hope so.
What do we say? Dolphin. What's our code
Oh.
word? Asparagus. So look, if you listen to this episode, just pop us a dolphin asparagus. That'll mean that you are, in fact.
What was that? I don't.
That was if you've ever had sexual fantasies about a dolphin.
Oh, right.
But you didn't want to admit it. And you just write dolphin asparagus. And we got at least 15 dolphin asparaguses. And I have to imagine 14 and a half of those were joking.
Yes.
But I like to believe that 0.5 of those was sincerely
Sure.
attracted to a dolphin.
Oh man, this show.
This show, what a show. It's going downhill. I love you.
Love you.